You are in the Mentoring Matters discussion room, and this room is sponsored by the Mentoring Club. We are a non-profit organization. Our mission is to provide a mentoring community for aspiring and seasoned leaders. And for this morning's session, we have one of our mentors, Professor Pete Alexander. It took 35 years for him to optimize his career. As you can see from the title, 35 years to career optimization. Some of the questions that we have in that journey are: is doing great at interviews a good thing? Or to trade passion for money, is that a good idea? How do you avoid career burnout? And let's learn from Professor Pete, who has done it all. Good morning, Professor Pete.
Good morning, Liesel. Thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome. It's our pleasure to have you. My pleasure to have you as a mentor in the Mentoring Club. So thank you very much for giving back through this organization. My first question, and this is a curious question, Professor Pete. So why do we call you Professor Pete?
In the late 1990s, I had an internet marketing company. I didn't have the big budget to try and promote it using, back then, a lot of traditional media primarily. I decided that I would teach a few classes at the local universities, primarily UC Berkeley, and I really, really enjoyed it. And so I decided in 2001 that I would get my PhD. I completed that in 2006, but while I was teaching classes, my students would come up to me and either call me professor or doctor. I always preferred professor because I'm one that believes that the doctor designation is one that should be for somebody with a medical degree. I just loved the name professor. I didn't use it on LinkedIn really extensively until 2018. And the reason I decided to do that was because Peter Alexander or Pete Alexander is an extremely common name. I wanted to help differentiate myself a little bit. I started using Professor Pete. It's helped me differentiate. And I just love that designation because it truly is, it's true. It's not like a lot of people who just throw that name on there. I know a lot of people who have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees. They call themselves doctor or professor because they're an expert in something. But technically, if you don't have the doctorate or the designations for that, it's a little bit extending the truth. So that's a little long story short about why I came about with Professor Pete.
It just occurred to me that really the passion that you have for teaching was deeply rooted in your heart. That's probably why the title is associated with you and you've carried it through. And so it's also good to know that there is that practical aspect that it also differentiates you because of the common name that you have. So, okay, well, thank you for sharing that. Now, let's back up a little bit. Before realizing that being a professor was your calling and that you love the satisfaction that you get out of teaching people, seeing them grow through your help, how did you get started in establishing yourself in a job or career?
It really was a hit or miss. Early in my career, I had a lot of different jobs. In fact, only when I moved a couple of years ago did I finally get rid of, I had a file of all the different business cards of different permanent positions I had early on in my career. And I actually counted close to 20. It was interesting because, first of all, I thought maybe I should do interview coaching because, I always loved interviewing with different companies. As somebody very young in my career, I just kind of figured that, well, if something doesn't sound right or it doesn't sound interesting, let me just try it out and see if I don't like it. And if I don't like it, I can try and change it. And if I can't change it, I can move on to the next job. And that's what I did. I wouldn't recommend that necessarily, but it was what I did. And I had just these really different jobs, organizations that exposed me to things that what I learned from was what I didn't want in a job. So as I would have a particular short-term job that was a permanent job, but it was something that obviously wasn't a good fit for me, at least it taught me what I did and didn't like. As I matured in my career, I was able to better align that for the skills that I have and taking on challenges that I knew that I could be successful with. It was interesting because I must have had a magic touch when it came to the interviewing process, because I could go from an interview to an offer and then start the job and then go, oh gosh, what did I do? Or no, I don't like this, or I want to try and change that. So there were a lot of jobs that I had that were not very long, less than a month.
Can you remember what was the shortest job that you had that you kept?
The shortest one would have been 1 week. The reason it was 1 week, I took a job at a bank that got acquired by another bank many years ago. I took a job with this bank for two reasons. One, it was in an area, a city that I was interested in living in. And two, the people who I interviewed with were really nice. The job itself was so boring. Oh my gosh. It was a technical writer. Back then, this was well before the internet. It was word processing it was there, but it wasn't as implemented into businesses as it is now. I was given a stack of binders that each binder was probably 400 pages long. And what it was bank operating procedures. And I had to sit there and read over a particular procedure, compare it to the new procedure, and then make edits to that document. Like I said, you'd sit and I had a wonderful cube. I mean, it was probably the fanciest cube I had ever had, all oak or beautiful wood, nice and quiet. But I just literally every 5 minutes, I'd look up at the clock and go, oh my God, it's only been 5 minutes since the last time I looked. I remember when I went in to resign, my manager told me that, which was really sweet. I was just honest. I said, I didn't know until after we started that this wasn't going to fit. It's not a right fit for me. After the conversation, that person told me, he said, the way that you handled this, I just want you to know that I still believe that I hired the right person. That was really kind. So I remember that. And that was easily 35 years ago.
What would you consider as major life altering experiences and decisions you've made?
A lot of those had to do with what was going on in my personal life. Some of you know that I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. I was lucky enough to find a 12-step program when I was in my mid-20s. And that helped me realize, first and foremost, that I need to be happy in my life. That had a dramatic effect on me in terms of looking for work where I could feel inspired, etc. Another big point in my career that was a personal thing is when I got married. The job that I had at that time, I spent most of my career in the medical device industry. I was working for a company that actually had recruited me when I was working for a pharmaceutical company. They wanted me to come work for them because I was calling on a doctor who was a part owner in this med device company. And he had seen how well I had trained his staff on how to use an inhaler because I was doing allergy respiratory products. That job that I got in the med device industry, I was traveling 50-60% of the time. At first, it was pretty cool and sexy because I had never had a job that had that much travel before, and I was all over the country. It really got old after about a year because it felt more like I was coming home just to do my laundry. I was engaged at that time, and when I decided to get married, I knew that it wasn't good for my marriage to be gone so much. That got me to look at a job at another med device company where my travel schedule wasn't as rigorous. The job that I ended up taking was not a good fit whatsoever. The only good thing about it was local to where I could get to it with the Bay Area traffic. The job itself even though it was the same title as what I had previously, it was a completely different ball game, and I didn't last. So I wouldn't have changed jobs had I not been married. And then later on in my career, I found a job that I really, really enjoyed and did very well at, which was teaching classes, which started back in the late 1990s. I ended up having to leave that because in 2001, leave most of because I was teaching almost full time. I had to end up leaving that because we had our second child. Unfortunately, teaching doesn't come with a great salary. I had to go back to the med device industry to be able to make sure that the kids were well taken care of in terms of resources and finances. Probably the last thing that I would think of that was a career altering experience was in 2018. I was working for the last of the medical device companies I worked for. I was pushing myself so hard that I ended up in the emergency room and an extended stay in ICU because I had somebody that I was working for who was a micromanager. I was in my early 50s. I mean, and I'm just too old to have a micromanager. That was very difficult. I was working on a very high profile project. I let the stress get to me, and it was a eye-opening experience, and one I'm very grateful for, because had I not had that, I would not have changed my perception on how I was risking my health for my career, which isn't a good trade.
You mentioned two things that really caught my attention in terms of areas in life that you found yourself having to make decisions. You mentioned one is family and one is health. Family is one of our community values in the mentoring club. And you mentioned parenthood being a pivotal stage in your life. And in one of our past conversations, you also shared about having to take care of your dad and now your mom. What lessons would you like to share about the priority you have given to family versus career or work?
You have to think about what is really important in your life. I always thought that when I'm on my deathbed that I'm not likely to be sitting there thinking, oh, if only I would have spent one more hour at work. I just don't see that happening. I have a technique that I use with some clients, which is called write your own obituary. You do this twice. The first time is you write the obituary as if you had died today and whoever's going to be there in the audience. You write it a second time. This time you concentrate on the people that are in the first two rows of that audience. That's very eye-opening, because the people who are going to be there are going to be your close friends and your family. What do you want to be remembered for? If you're working all the time and you're not prioritizing the other things that should be important in your life, you may come to a time where you think, wow, did I miss out? When I had that job that I was traveling so much, all I was doing was finding out that, that I was missing this birthday, or I was missing some other important event. And I didn't want to be that person. I really think that it's important to look at your personal values, determine what is important to you, both for your career, what your personal values are, what your personal values towards your family is, and make sure that whatever decisions you make as it relates to your career, your family, that it's in alignment with those top five values, because that's sort of your North Star.
As far as health is concerned, can you share with us how you think people should look at their health and work in the overall scheme of things? Of course, we want to be successful in our careers. How do we manage health with that drive for success?
I didn't come up with this. I believe that health is wealth, first and foremost. And when I talk with people who are trading their health for their careers, I ask them, think about the last time that you were really, really sick, let's say with the flu or something else. Did you feel like doing anything other than lying in bed. And chances are we don't, because we don't have any energy. We're just feeling terrible. The reality is, if we don't have our health, and let's say we're just lying in that bed, we're no good to our careers. We're no good to the businesses we run. We're no good to the people who are close to us in life. The reality is that our health is absolutely the most important thing. We can't take it for granted, because if we don't have it, we're not going to be able to do much else. When somebody is working so hard that they can see the physical effects of that, your body is going to give you warning signs and will continue to give you warning signs. But if you don't do anything about those warning signs, eventually the weakest link in your body is going to break down. In my case, it was my pancreas. There is no diabetes in my family, yet I got stress-induced diabetes. And basically what happens is that when you continuously stress yourself out, what ends up happening is that as we continue to dump that cortisol and that adrenaline into our bodies, it creates this cellular inflammation in our bodies. That cellular inflammation, if it goes unchecked, that's what leads to chronic disease. Whether for me it was diabetes, for others it might be heart disease or cancer. It's really important to listen to your body early on. Whatever, something where if you're not being able to sleep well, or you have stomach issues, or maybe gaining or losing weight rapidly, or headaches, frequent headaches, these are the earlier signs that your body is telling you that you need to do something about it. And it's really important to do that before a more difficult health challenge comes your way.
Going into the core of this room, which is about mentoring. Did any mentors, or did mentoring, whether you're mentoring people or some people are mentoring you, did that play a part in your journey?
Oh, certainly. At different stops in my career, I would usually be paired up with someone who was more experienced, especially when I was in sales, where I could tap into those people, and I enjoyed using those as mentors. When I would move into a different particular type of role at a different organization, I would find mentors in professional organizations. I remember when I started teaching the college classes, I actually got involved in a training organization, that association, I should say, that allowed me to learn different ideas and to get mentored by different people who had more experience than I did. So I greatly benefited from that. When I ended up becoming an entrepreneur the second time, because the first time with the internet marketing company, but then I decided I wanted to buy a service-based business after I was working for the second med device company in a row that got bought by their competitor. And I thought, well, maybe I need to have a little bit more control over what's going on with my career. And I had a wonderful mentor who helped me research different businesses that I could buy, and tapping into his knowledge, tapping into his experience, tapping into his thought process was really beneficial for me, and zero in on a particular type of company that I would be most interested in buying. And although you never know exactly how it's going to go, there were certainly challenges, especially that first year after I bought the business. But getting just to that part, I don't think I would have been able to have done it successfully without my mentor.
You were in the corporate world, different jobs. You did great at interviews, and you probably had so many jobs that you cannot count anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then now you're sharing that you even bought a business, and then eventually now you're running your own practice, influenced by that episode and realization about the importance of health. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing now?
Sure. I still run that service-based business. I bought it back in 2005. It's Office Plants by Everything Grows. It's now the fourth largest interior landscaping business in the San Francisco Bay Area. What I ended up doing after I built it up to a certain level, one of my old bosses in the med device industry called me up one day and threw a bunch of money and stock options at me and just did a very hard sell to try and get me to come back to the corporate world. After a long thought process, I decided I needed a new challenge because I had been, this was back in 2010. And I thought that, well, maybe it's time for me to go back because I wasn't being challenged as much running my business as I was initially. I hired someone to take over a lot of my responsibilities. Went back to the corporate world and did that for another 8 years until I had my burnout. After that burnout, it taught me how important health is. That helped me transition into stress relief coaching, as well as I still run the landscaping business. But because I've managed to bring on good people, I can do that remotely because I moved up to Washington from California after my youngest graduated high school. I did that because I needed to get away from what was causing me to stress myself out as much.
Your mentoring around stress management has already a great proof in one of our mentees who has launched her business recently. Thank you for making that difference in her life.
Oh, it's my pleasure. She's doing really great. And for me, it's not only do I see it or hear it as we meet, but I actually physically see it too on our Zoom calls. My goodness, the very first Zoom call I had with her, and she looked terrible. She's regenerating herself too. And that's something that it's crazy. But if you can figure out how to manage your stress better, it's almost like a fountain of youth for yourself. I look at myself 13 years ago when I first was diagnosed with stress-induced diabetes. And I look at myself now, and other than the gray hair, I look younger than I did 13 years ago. That is really something.
How would you advise, having experienced all of that in your life, how would you advise your younger self?
Two things. One is to have gratitude for the different experiences I've had because I've learned now how important gratitude is. Every experience that we encounter helps us grow. There's always positive learnings. It could be a real negative experience, but there's a positive learning to be found from that. If we look at it from the positive, if you have gratitude for any experience that you encounter, you position yourself for more success in the future because you attract more positive energy towards yourself when you are also sending out that positive energy into the universe. That was something I didn't learn until a few years ago. So I wish I would have learned that a long time ago. The other thing that I would probably tell my younger self is I remember how bad I felt. I handed over all these classes that had taken a few years for me to build up, and I was teaching them regularly 2 to 3 times a year, and I was just enjoying it. I totally identified with it. And having to give up those classes and go back to a corporate world where I had high stress, having people who I didn't really care for that I had to work with. If I had to do that all over again, I probably would say to my younger self, resist that temptation of that higher salary because there's more to career success and happiness than the paycheck.
Money that will support your family versus doing something that you love
Mm-hmm.
and having to make that hard decision. Not easy. Looking at other people now, what advice would you give them if they are starting out their careers or they are in mid career?
The thing that I would highly recommend is to definitely elicit your personal values as it relates to your career. Had I done that earlier in my career, I think I wouldn't have had so many different jobs. I don't think I would have bounced around as much as I did, and I would have really been able to focus much more. It's a very powerful, powerful thing to do your personal values. And what's interesting about those is that over your career, your top five personal values are likely not to shift dramatically. At the most, like say at the beginning of your career and at near the end of your career, of your top five values, three of them are going to stay, maybe four, and there's going to be one that's going to swap out with something else. Each time that you come up with a important decision as it relates to your career, the opportunity to run that decision by your top five values and make sure that that decision is in alignment with those top five values truly is a game changer. And that's something that works whether or not you're at the beginning of your career, mid-career, or any point in your career. It is an extremely powerful exercise. I've taken a mentoring club through that activity, and it really does help.
Yes, I agree. Right. So we self awareness, knowing our values, that's very important. Part of our tradition, Hong and I have come up with our last question for our guest mentors. It's sort of like a reflection question as to what already happened and what you're looking forward to. If you were to write a book about your life's journey so far, what would the title be?
That would be have gratitude for the roller coaster journey of life.
Okay, that's very reflective of what you've shared with us this morning, Pete. Thank you very much
My pleasure.
for being vulnerable and for sharing your life authentically to all of us today. And I'm sure when we publish this, a lot of other people will benefit from the guidance that you have provided us. So thank you.